Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the character of Tinker in the novel Just Dance by Patricia MacLachlan. And I'm going to be talking about Tinker in relationship to four themes: love of animals, writing, music, and friendship. We meet Tinker in chapter number 5. Sylvia is riding around town and in the countryside with Sheriff Ludolph. And on page 43, she yells, "Wait, stop." And she sees a coyote following or maybe stalking a man. And Bud stops the car and says, "Oh, that's just Tinker in his long underwear." And so we learn that Tinker is a bit of an eccentric. An eccentric is someone who's a little bit unusual or different. He has a pet coyote. He lives by himself in a small cabin, and he wears long underwear. So our first thing that we're going to talk about is love of animals. On page 46, Tinker explains to Sylvie that he found Bernie as a pup, and that Bernie will sleep on the porch in the warm months, and then during the cold of winter, he'll sleep in a dog bed next to the fireplace. And there's really a kind of a touching scene on page 60 and 61 when Sylvie goes back by herself to visit Tinker. At the bottom of 60, Tinker says, "If you turn your head very slowly toward me, you'll see something else surprising. Slowly, remember." And Sylvie says, "I turned my head and looked into the very close yellow eyes of Tinker's coyote." And then Tinker says to her, "Bernie likes you. I knew he would." And so he introduces Sylvie to the friendship of his pet coyote. The second thing I want to talk about is writing. And if we go back to when Sylvie and Tinker first meet on page 45, she tells him, "I'm Sylvie Bloom." And he smiles at her, and then he looks at her and he says, "The Sylvie Bloom who writes the log?" And she nods, and he says, "You're good." So we know that he has been reading her writing, and he encourages her. On page 46, when she walks into his cabin, she sees a desk under the window with papers, pens, and an old typewriter. And then on page 47, Bud explains that he observes life, and he sometimes writes about it in his journal. And then on page 47, we see this beautiful haiku that Tinker has written. "Bird song ends at dusk. Sun falls down into still night. Barn owl wakes to hunt." So again, writing is very important, not only to Sylvie, but also to Tinker. Let's also talk just a little bit about music. And when Sylvie goes back to visit Tinker, she tells him a little bit about her mother, that she was a professional opera singer. And on page 62, Tinker adds, "I know that. I once heard her sing with James Grayston in London." And then he goes on to explain that he had been a world traveler earlier in his life. He said, "Your mother has a stunningly beautiful voice." So he also appreciates music, and in particular, the singing of her mother. Finally, friendship. Tinker, of course, becomes one of Sylvie's new friends in the book. And after she visits him, on page 63, she said, "Before I left, I suddenly hugged Tinker." And he looked startled and he said, "No one hugs me." "I do," I said. And so she's showing him a little bit of friendship for a man who, for the most part, lives by himself in this small cabin. And then on 72, she writes a haiku for her log, and she says, Find a yellow-eyed friend to look into your eyes. Find a wise blue-eyed friend to hug. Of course, the yellow-eyed friend is Bernie, and the wise blue-eyed friend to hug is her new friend, Tinker. And on 73, she says, the look of Tinker with Bernie, family. So I hope you've enjoyed this short video about the character of Tinker in Just Dance by Patricia MacLachlan. Thank you very much. Goodbye.